to the next part of this unit. We're continuing unit 34. That's to do with commerce, selling, changing ownership. We defined in the previous segment that when we say commerce, we're referring to is changing of ownership. Any changing of ownership is an issue on Shabbat, and that's why when we say you're not allowed to makdish things, right? You're not to change things out of my ownership to Kadosh Baruch Hu's ownership, as it were. Why not? Because it's like having commerce, like having mekach umemkar. By the way, commerce is a decent way of saying mekach umemkar, right? I don't know if I'm sounding silly to all of you. What? Saying it's okay. As an Israeli, we try, but I want to make sure I don't sound silly. Anyway, usually the truth is, usually we have Rabbi Yoel here to save me from my English mistakes, but no one here is no one here is as rude as him. No, stop. I ask him to help me out if I ever get stuck. Anyway, so we said the definition is changing ownership. Since the definition is passing ownership on from one to another, that automatically includes, right? The original gzera is not to run the market, not to sell things, but really also giving things, giving things to Kadosh Baruch Hu or giving things to anyone else is included. So this is brought in the Or Zarua as an extrapolation of that. Right, it's change of ownership. Right, so the definition is changing ownership, and therefore that includes hekdesh, and that also includes giving anyone else presents. Not only are you not allowed to give presents to Kadosh Baruch Hu, you're also allowed to give presents to your neighbors or to anyone else. Right? The Rambam says, "Hamocher o hanoten b'Shabbat." Why hamocher o hanoten? Two separate things, right? First of all, if you sell things, but also if you give for free, right? Just pointing out, this shows that not only is there an issue of receiving something on Shabbos, giving it is an issur as well, or at least, right? Rambam says hanoten. Why? Because if you say that noten is like mocher, right? I can sell something and then get something in return. But also, if I don't get anything in return, that's also asur. How do we know that? That's like hekdesh, right? I give hekdesh, what I get in return. So you say, yeah, olam haba, yeah, right? But that's probably true anyway. When you give anyone else a present, they also appreciate it, and you're receiving a similar thing. So the Rambam, the Or Zarua, they say selling, but also giving presents is asur on Shabbos and Yom Tov, af al pi shemakinoto, right? So it does work. The ownership has passed from one to the other. It was effective, but it's asur. There was, right? This is because you might think that if it's prohibited, it doesn't work either. If I give you a present on Shabbos and I want a reneg, can I say, you know what? I changed my mind. I want it back, right? Am I allowed to do that on Shabbos? Do I say, well, you're not allowed to give presents on Shabbos, so maybe it never happened, to save it from the...
So I have a question. So I may not know this very well, but isn't there some concept that there is no legitimacy to something that's against the Torah, to like a transaction that's against the Torah? So this came up with Shemitah, whether you could sell the land to a non-Jew, but since that's not allowed, therefore the transaction was not considered legitimate. And
so, first of all, there is definitely an issue with that, and that's why let's just read the Rambam after hearing Glenn's comment. Let's read the Rambam, and the Rambam is aware of this issue, right? In other words, yes, it is an issue. Meaning, despite it being prohibited, it works. By the way, you'll note, where does this Rambam appear? Hilchot Mechila, right? This is a Choshen Mishpat Rambam, right? There's a Rambam that talks about the legality of the transaction, right? In other words, is it legally binding? The Rambam is not discussing the question of is this Asur on Shabbos. He happens to mention that, oh, by the way, you will be beaten for this, right? It is prohibited, but it does work. That's what the Rambam is mostly concerned with, the question of does it work, right? So the answer is yes, there is such an issue. The Shemitah thing is a bit more complicated. Why does it work here? We won't go into that right now. So, if you want to remind me, maybe we'll discuss it next time. But it's a fair question. As you see, the Rambam is concerned about this, and that's why in Hilchot Mechira, right, in Choshen Mishpat, in the legal section of the Rambam, right, that's where the Rambam discusses it. Not even in Chot Shabbat. This isn't mentioned explicitly in Chot Shabbat. That's why I went all the way to there to pick it up, right? Says now, okay. So that seems to be an issue. We're giving presents. So it sounds here, or Zarua Rambam, right? The mainstream Rishonim, you're not allowed to give presents on Shabbos, except from the time of the Tanakh and also from the time of the Mishnah, it seems like it was very much condoned. It says Nehemiah, once again, Nehemiah. So Nehemiah shut up the marketplaces, right? Just reminding us, right? We saw this over there. Right? He closed up the markets, closed up the city, so that people won't be able to run the market on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And then Nehemiah says on Rosh Hashanah, Nehemiah had a big tshuva rally. And after the rally, he says, "Vayomer lehem, lechu ichlu mashmanim ushtu mamtakim v'shilchu manot lein nachon lo ki kadosh hayom la'adonenu v'al ta'atzu ki chadvat Hashem hi ma'uzchem." So go eat and make merry, but what's more important to us is shilchu manot lein nachon lo. This is where the idea of mishloach manot comes from, by the way, right? In other words, it really works. The idea of mishloach manot works the other way around. Okay. Mishloach manot really works the other way around. We think mishloach manot started on Purim, right? It goes the other way. Really, mishloach manot was invented on Yom Tov. And then they wanted Purim to be like Yom Tov. So they said, let's do all those things we do on Yom Tov. For example, Mishloach Manot. So Nehemiah says, make sure people have their seudah. Make sure people have their seudah. So send them manot. This sounds like you have to give them presents, right? When you give Mishloach Manot, we're giving people presents. So Nehemiah is going against the Rambam, right? So that's surprising. You'd think Nehemiah would know the Rambam, right? Now, this, and then the Mishnah now. So Nehemiah is bad enough, and the Mishnah, Mele Nehemiah doesn't know the Rambam, but Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel really should know the Rambam, right? Beit Shammai omrim, Ein meshalchim biyom tov el manot. Beit Hillel omrim, meshalchim behema, chaya va'of, ben chayim, ben shchutin, meshalchim yinot, shmanim, slatot, kitniot, avolot tvua, Rabbi Shimon atir betvua. So, this is a nice and long list of things people want to send each other on Yom Tov. The next Mishnah, we're gonna go deeper into the examples. I just want to read this quickly to get a sense of what's going on. Mishalchim kelim ben tfurin ben sheinan tfurin v'af al pi sheyesh ben kilayim v'hem letzorach hamoed. That's the important point. That's the key factor. We can go back to we're gonna look at all of these more carefully in a moment. But I just want us to get a sense of what's going on here, right? Beit Shammai say you can only send manot. Beit Hillel say you send a whole long list. And then you move on to the next Mishnah, you can send kilim. As long as they're tzorach hamoed. Avol lo sandal mesumar velo min al shinot afur. Rabbi Yehuda omer af lo min al levan mipnei shetzarich uman. Ze hakal kol shenotin bo biyom tov meshalchin oto. So, what is the difference between Mishnah Tet and Mishnah Yud? Mishnah Tet is talking about food. Beit Shammai say when it comes to food, you have to have manot, you have to have food that is already ready to be eaten. You can only send manot. Beit Hillel say, no, you can send whatever. You can send an ox over, you can send a bag of flour over, right? Whatever it is. Again, we're talking about Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, you're allowed to shech the ox and then cook it. You're allowed to take the flour and make pancakes, right? You're allowed to use all these things on Yom Tov. So Beit Shammai say when we say you're allowed to give a present on Yom Tov, the present, you can give only prepared food stuff. That's what Beit Shammai say. Beit Hillel say no. Any kinds of food, anything to fill up their pantry, anything they could use on Yom Tov is okay. And then Mishnah Yud continues that and says anything you could use on Yom Tov is okay. So it sounds like the rule seems to be when it comes to food, basically anything could be used on Yom Tov when it comes to food. And when it comes to other things, anything anything that could be useful on Yom Tov, right? So when the Rambam and the Or Zarua say you're not allowed to give presents on Shabbos and Yom Tov, what they're referring to is presents that are not useful on Yom Tov, on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And the Mishnah says, right? I mean, the Rambam agrees with the Mishnah, obviously. The Mishnah says you can also anything that's useful on Yom Tov can also be sent on Yom Tov. By the way, why is the Mishnah talking about sending things over on Yom Tov, not on Shabbos? Why not on Shabbos? So you can say, well, you can't send an ox over on Shabbos. You can't send flour over on Shabbos. What are you going to do with flour on Shabbos, right? It's muktzah because nothing to do with it on Shabbos. But all right, what about other things? What about manot, right? Can I send over hummus and crackers or herring and crackers over on Shabbos? Is that okay? Why is this specifically referring to Yom Tov and not to Shabbos and sending all these manot over? Sorry, you muted yourself again?
Just carrying on Shabbat.
Right, exactly. Shabbos, Shabbos they didn't want to encourage sending presents to each other because there's an issue of carrying on Shabbos. Yom Tov, there's no issue of carrying. So, why, and more than that, right? Why is there no issue of carrying? I saw. Why is there no issue of carrying on Yom Tov? Because we encourage this. Because we want everyone to be friends and we want everyone to send manot over to each other. That's why Hashem says you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov and you're allowed to send things over to each other on Yom Tov. On Shabbos, you can't carry, and then you won't. And then Aliyat Seishim Kol B'Yom Shabbat. Whatever you have on Shabbos in your home, that's what you have. That's it. But the important point to us is that when it comes to presents, anything Kol Shenotin B'Yom Tov Mishalchin Oto. So when the Rambam says you're not allowed to send presents over on Yom Tov and Shabbos, it's only things that can't be used on Yom Tov. But the Gemara goes quite far with this. Zakar Kol Shenotin B'Yom Tov. Rav Sheshet Sha'alu l'Rabbanan l'Shidur Tefillin b'Yom HaTava. You're allowed to send tefillin over on Yom Tov. Amar le'Abai v'Hanan T'nai Kol Shenotin B'Yom Tov Mishalchin Oto. You don't put tefillin on Yom Tov. Why would you be sending tefillin over on Yom Tov? You can't use that on Yom Tov. Hachika Amal Kol Shenotin Bo B'Chol Mishalchin Oto B'Yom Tov. That broadens things out tremendously, right? Because we go from things that could be used on Yom Tov to things that are useful anytime at all. Anything useful. I mean, once you go there, it's hard to think of anything you can't send over. If you can send tefillin over, you can't use the tefillin on Yom Tov, but you could use them on Sunday, or you could give them your grandson as a bar mitzvah present, right? You'll have what to do with the tefillin at some point, and therefore you're allowed to send it on Yom Tov. That really does broaden the scale and the spectrum of what things you could, what presents you can give on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So it's just interesting. We start off from the Rambam and the Or Zarua say you're not allowed to send presents on Yom Tov. The Mishnah says, well, whatever you could use on Yom Tov, and then Rav Sheshet goes on and says, what we mean is you're allowed to send anything useful on Yom Tov. So let's define what do we mean by anything useful? Because presumably this still needs to be defined. So Rashi says like this. So we're going to see 4 explanations that we've shown. And what do we mean when we say anything that's useful on Chol, you're allowed to send on Yom Tov? Says Rashi, כל שנותין בו בכל, שהוא מתוקן כל צורכו, meaning one condition has to be prepared. It can't be something that requires anything. It could be used right away. Anything that could be, that's already ready to be used, right? That's the first criteria. משלחין אותו ביום טוב, דהי ביום טוב דקתני מתניתין, לאו נאותין דלקמי, אלא משלחין דבטלי. לאתו את תפילינתה, דינם ימנח לו ביום טוב ליקה איסורה. So that is the second condition, right? The condition number one, it has to be prepared to be used. Condition number two, that that using is not prohibited. Now, we don't put our tefillin on Yom Tov, but it's not really prohibited to put tefillin on Yom Tov. That's Rashi's point. And therefore, as opposed to Sandal Mesumah, we're not going to go into Sandal Mesumah right now, it's a whole other issue. But the important point to us is whatever is ready to be used and isn't prohibited to use on Yom Tov, even though we know you're not going to use it on Yom Tov, right? Just as an example, I'll point out, Beit Shammai say you're only allowed to send manot, food that you can serve on the table right away, right? So Beit Hillel say you can also send things that you can also send the ingredients that could then be used to create food, right? You can send flour and you can send sugar and you can send an ox, right? You can send anything that could be used to create the food. Says Rashi, this is true only about food, right? Only when it comes to food could you send things that still require preparation. When it comes to anything else, it has to be something that has these two criteria. Number one, let's start from the second. Number one, it's not prohibited to use on Yom Tov. And number two, doesn't require any more preparation to be used on Sunday or after Yom Tov, whatever, right?
According to Rashi's criteria, probably you couldn't send flour on Shabbat then, or a cow, because unlike on Yom Tov,
right, only on Yom Tov, not on Shabbat, correct. Right, because why? Because it's not prepared. Well, also, I guess it doesn't fit either criteria, right? First of all, the flour can't be used as is, right? This criteria says it has to be something you could use as is.
But we just said food is kanira different because you can.
Right. Oh, very good. Exactly. So that's the distinction. Sorry, I skipped and jumped over here. That's the distinction between these two mishnayot, right? The first mishnah discusses food. Beit Shammai said it has to be something prepared. Let's learn it the other way. It'll be easier to read the second mishnah before the first mishnah. The second mishnah says kol shenotin bo b'yom tov, meaning anything that's ready to be used as is and is not prohibited to use on Yom Tov. Beit Shammai says this applies to food as well. The criteria of something that could be used as is applies to food as well. Beit Hillel say no. When it comes to food, you can send anything. You can also send ingredients that still need to be processed. Okay, so according to Rashi, when it comes to I'd read Mishnah Yud and then Mishnah Tet, just summing up Rashi's opinion. Rashi says kol shenotin bo b'yom tov means anything that could be used as is and is not prohibited to use on Yom Tov, you're allowed to send as a present on Yom Tov. Beit Shammai say this applies to food as well, and therefore it has to be ready to be used as is on Yom Tov. Beit Hillel say no, also the ingredients. The ingredients could be used could be sent as well. That's Rashi's opinion. Let's see the Rashba. Kol shenotin bo b'chol kemot shehu, ve'in tzarich uman letakno, mishalchin oto b'yom tov. אף על פי שאין ראוי להשתמש בו ביום טוב. כיצד משלחים תפילין תפורים ביום טוב? ולמה יתירו כן להוציא מרשות היחיד לשוד הרבים, לפי ששמחה היא לא מי שמתקבל בנותיו אצל חברו, והרי זה כצורך אחר. I'm sorry, the Rashba. I mentioned earlier, I saw somewhere, it's the Rashba. The Rashba says, why are you allowed to carry on Yom Tov? Because we want to encourage people to give presents on Yom Tov. Meaning it works the other way around. It's not that it happens to be that you're allowed to give presents on Yom Tov. That's not the right way to look at it. The right way to look at it is Kadosh Baruch Hu said, Shabbos and Yom Tov you really shouldn't carry, except for Yom Tov, because we want to encourage people to give presents on Yom Tov. Right? Carrying should be a malacha both on Shabbos and Yom Tov. but we're going to specifically allow carrying on Yom Tov because we want to encourage people to give presents. Now, the Gzeira that says you're not allowed to give presents on Shabbos and Yom Tov is only for things that, so Rashi had his criteria, the Rashba has a slightly different criteria. Right? If you need a specialist, if you need someone who has specific, if you could do this by yourself, so you're allowed to send it on Yom Tov. So that's how the Rashba defines it. It's not enough that this is I'd say lighter criteria than Rashi, right? Rashi says something doesn't require any more preparation. It doesn't matter if you require a professional or not, right? Regardless of whether you need a professional or not, according to the Rashba, according to Rashi, it just has to be prepared. According to the Rashba, if you can prepare it yourself, it's not a problem. Right? Someone asked me recently, would the Rashba say, can you send an IKEA closet over to someone, right? A packaged, right? A chair, closet, whatever, right? So he said, you don't need, it really needs to be put together. It requires a proper melacha to create something here, but it doesn't require a professional, right? So according to the Rashba, it would seem that would be okay. So the Rashba focuses on whether you need a professional to put it together, as opposed to Rashi, who had the two criteria of something that's prepared to be used, which is a more strict criteria, and also something that doesn't transgress Yom Tov if you choose to use it, even though we know you're not going to use it on Yom Tov. Says the Rambam. כל שנותן בו אפילו בחול, אף על פי שאינו נותן בו ביום טוב, כגון תפילין, מותר שלחו לחברו ביום טוב, ואין צריך לומר דבר שנותן בו ביום טוב, כגון יינות, שמנים, סלטות שמותר לשולחן. וכל דבר שאינו נותן בו בחול, עד שיעשה בו מעשה שאסור לעשותו ביום טוב, אין משלחים אותו ביום טוב. So the Rambam's definition, right, is to be something that's prepared to be, that's ready to be used. So he agrees with the direction that, right, so but all Rashi, Rashba, and the Rambam are all saying when it comes to things that aren't food, there has to be something that's prepared, more prepared, but define how prepared does it need to be. So Rashi, it sounds like he says, has to be fully prepared, right? Metukan kol tzorko, fully prepared. The Rashba says something that doesn't require a professional to put together, and the Rambam says something that is not a transgression of Shabbos and Yom Tov if you want to put it together. So the example of the IKEA closet, right? That would be a nice nafkamina between the Rashba and the Rambam, right? Because the Rashba would say, you don't need a professional to put an IKEA closet together, right? You can, that's the whole point. You do it yourself. But the Rambam would say, but you're not allowed to do that. So you don't require a professional, but you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to put together on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and therefore you're not allowed to give that as a present on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So, right, so Rashi, Rashba, and the Rambam all agree that it's not enough, that it's something that has to be ready enough to be used. How ready? So I think that on the one hand they sound very much the same direction. On the other hand, I think there is a fundamental difference. Rashi says to be ready to be used as is. The Rashba says something that doesn't require a professional. I think Rashi and the Rashba, in a sense, are on the same page. We want to make someone happy. If I say, here's a present, now you have to go hire someone to put it together. It's not good enough a present. It's not close enough. If it's something that could be used on Yom Tov, great. You say something it's not Rashi said, if you can't be used on Yom Tov, forget it. It's not a good present. If you can't use it on Yom Tov, meaning you still have to put it together, it's not ready to be used, or it's also to use on Yom Tov. So it's not a Yom Tov-dik present. That's Rashi's opinion. The Rashba says, what kind of present is that? You give him a present, but now he has to get a professional to go put it together for him. That's not the kind of present I want people to send on Yom Tov. I mean, it could be something that will save you a lot of money, but that's not the kind of Simchat Yom Tov, I don't want you to start to create new worries for people on Yom Tov. I give you something that will improve your life, but now you have to start figuring out, how do I put this together? Who am I going to call? No. Yom Tov, we need the presents to be very simple, something you can do it yourself, right? Take care of it yourself. It doesn't have to be ready to be used, but at least you don't have to make a phone call and find the person who's going to take care of it for you. The Rambam says the not yontivdik present is something that doesn't require you to think about other melachot that have to be done. It's not an issue of worry. I think the Rashba, the issue is a worry. Now you have to go find a professional. That's the problem with such a present, that I have to start looking for a professional to put it together for me. It's not right. And now I'm starting to worry about other things. The Rambam, I think the issue has more to do with thinking about chol dik melachot, right? You're not to give something that then, in order to put together, you have to transgress an isur on Yom Tov. Says the Rambam in Pirush Mishnah, tam isur beit Shammai shelo yaseh keder shoseh bechol, gam beit Hillel lo hitiru, yaseh maseh yom chol gmurim. Hatvuah ina ruya la'achila asher tzricha tchina v'asur litchon b'yom tov. So the Rambam points out, I read earlier about the Mishnah, right? I said Rashi read the Mishnah as follows. He said, when you send kilim, kol she'notin bo b'yom tov has to comply with manot, things that are ready to be used. Only things that are ready to be used. The Rambam says, so that means that when it comes to things that aren't food, we agree with Beit Shammai. It has to be something that's prepared, according to Rashi, right? Beit Hillel say comes to food, we're more makel. The Rambam says, no. These conform to the same, it's the same definition. Why do Beit Hillel say you're not allowed to send bema chaya off, etc., but you are allowed to send tvuah? But you're not allowed, to send tvuah, because in order to use the grain on Yom Tov, that's something you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov. Everything else you're allowed to do on Yom Tov, but the bare grain, that you're not allowed to use on Yom Tov at all, and that's why you're not allowed to send it over. So, just pointing out, according to Rashi, the way we read the Mishnah is as follows: you're allowed to send anything that's ready to be used on Yom Tov. Say Beit Shammai, that applies to food as well, or that same criteria applies to food. Say Beit Hillel, not when it comes to food, we're more mekel. That's the way, and therefore Beit Shammai say we carry the rule in Mishnah Yud over to food as well. Beit Hillel are more mekel because it's food. That's the way Rashi learns it. The way the Rambam learns it is both Mishnayot are saying anything that doesn't require transgression of melacha, Beit Hillel and Mishnah Yud both say anything that doesn't require transgression of the melacha is equally asur. Just the last opinion here, then we'll sum up. The Ritva, lo nahil, so the Ritva says, rejects everything we've learned. He says, no, you're allowed to send tefillin over, and then you'll give a shiur on what tefillin look like and how to use tefillin. That's what you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. In other words, the Ritva rejects everything we said. He says all these funny criteria of something that's ready, something that's prepared. It has to be something you should use on Yom Tov, period. Something you could use on Yom Tov. If you can't use it on Yom Tov, don't send it over on Yom Tov. That's it. So it's a bit of a tricky shiur, 4 opinions on how to learn this Mishnah, but I just sum this up. That will end. The Mishnah seems to encourage, right? The Chamya encouraged, the Mishnah encourages giving presents on Yom Tov. The question is, what presents are you allowed to give on Yom Tov? So, the way Rashi learns the Mishnayot, he learns whatever is ready to be used on Yom Tov and it would not be a transgression of Yom Tov, you're allowed to send on Yom Tov. And this applies to, and Beit Shammai say, the first criteria applies to food as well. It has to be something that's prepared to be used. Beit Hillel say, I don't accept, when it comes to food, I'm more mekel, except for the second criteria, not something that would require the transgression of the melacha. That's the way Rashi learns the Mishnah. The Rambam learns the Mishnah the other way around. He says, Beit Shammai say everything always has to be prepared to be used right away, manot. And Beit Hillel say, no, anything that does not require transgression of a melacha, even though you're not going to use it, right? Anything that won't require transgression of a melacha in order to make it useful. That's the Rambam's opinion. The Rashba takes a different direction and says, when it comes to food, when it comes to other things, depends on whether now you're going to have to go call a professional and figure out how he's going to put this thing together. It's the Rashba. And the Ritva takes Kol Shenotin B'Yom Tov much more seriously, and frankly, what Rav Sheshet says, Kol Shenotin B'B'Chol B'Shalchinta B'Yom Tov, meaning if it's useful during the week, and you can use it on Yom Tov. It has to be something you can really use on Yom Tov. If you can't use it on Yom Tov, forget it. Those are the four opinions. Let's read Shulchan Aruch, who quotes the Rambam. מותר לשלוח לחברו ביום טוב בהמה, חיה ועוף אפילו חיים ועינות שמנים וסלטות וקטניות, אבל לא תבואה לפי שמחוסרת תחינה שהיא מלאכה אסורה ביום טוב, right? He puts that back into the first Mishnah. You're not allowed to send grain because that would require doing תחינה on Yom Tov. משלחים כלים אף על פי שאינם תפורים, שהם ראויים להישען עליהם. Kilayim, kashim, fine, we're not going to go into the kilayim question, but the main point is something that could be used on Yom Tov. משלחים תפילין כיוון שראויים להניחם b'chol, which once again is the Gemara. The Shulchan Aruch seems to go with the Rambam on this point.